You already know, somewhere beneath the noise of daily routine, that certain habits are not serving you. You have known it for a while. The fatigue that does not resolve with sleep. The digestion that is slightly off more often than it is right. The energy that dips at predictable points in the day. The waistline that expands incrementally despite no dramatic change in what you eat. You have attributed these things to age, to stress, to the general accumulation of a demanding life. And some of that attribution may be partially correct. But underneath all of it, there is something more specific happening. A biological story playing out across 3 organs that are among the most critical in your body, driven by 5 habits so embedded in the texture of modern daily life that most people never think to question them. Before we go any further, if this channel gives you the kind of honest, evidence-based clarity that is genuinely hard to find elsewhere, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. What I am going to walk you through today is not a general warning about unhealthy living. It is a specific, mechanistic account of 5 ordinary daily habits, habits you may be engaged in right now, habits that billions of people around the world share, and exactly what they are doing to your liver, your kidneys, and your pancreas in real biological time. Let us begin with why these 3 organs belong at the center of this conversation. The liver, the kidneys, and the pancreas form what you might think of as the body's primary metabolic management infrastructure. The liver processes virtually everything you consume, regulates blood glucose, synthesizes essential proteins, clears toxins and inflammatory byproducts from circulation, and produces bile for fat digestion. The kidneys filter approximately 180 liters of blood every single day, regulate fluid and electrolyte balance, manage blood pressure through hormonal mechanisms, and clear the metabolic waste products that accumulate as a byproduct of normal cellular function. The pancreas produces both the digestive enzymes that break down food in the small intestine, the hormones, insulin and glucagon, that regulate glucose metabolism throughout the entire body. These 3 organs work in continuous, interdependent collaboration. When one begins to struggle, the others compensate, increasing their own workload to maintain the metabolic stability the body requires. And when all 3 are under stress simultaneously, which is precisely what the 5 habits we are about to discuss produce, the compensatory capacity of the system as a whole begins to erode in ways that eventually become impossible to ignore, though by that point the damage is often considerably more advanced than it needed to be. The first habit is one that most people do not even recognize as a habit because it has become so normalized that it feels less like a choice and more like a feature of the landscape. It is eating repeatedly throughout the day, not in the sense of consuming large meals, but in the sense of being almost never truly without food for more than 2 or 3 hours. A breakfast, a mid-morning snack, a lunch, an afternoon snack, a pre-dinner nibble, a dinner, and something small in the evening. Each instance modest, the cumulative pattern relentless, and the biological consequence for all 3 organs we are discussing profound. Here is what continuous eating does at the level of organ physiology. Every time you eat, regardless of what you eat, your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin is not only a glucose regulatory hormone, it is a metabolic switching signal. When insulin is elevated, your body is in a state of energy storage and processing. When insulin is low, as it is during genuine periods of fasting between meals, your body shifts into a state of cellular maintenance, fat utilization, and autophagy, the process by which cells clear damaged components and regenerate their own internal machinery. Your liver, specifically, requires periods of low insulin to perform its glycogen regulation cycle properly, to reduce hepatic fat content, and to restore the sensitivity of its insulin receptors. Your pancreas requires periods of low insulin demand to rest its beta cells, the insulin-producing cells that, under conditions of continuous stimulation, progressively accumulate oxidative stress and lose functional capacity over time. Your kidneys require the hormonal fluctuations of a genuine eating and fasting cycle to maintain the electrolyte and fluid balance rhythms that their filtration function depends on. A 2019 study published in Cell Metabolism found that time-restricted eating, consolidating food intake into a consistent 8 to 10 hour window and allowing a genuine overnight fast of 14 to 16 hours, produced significant reductions in fasting insulin, hepatic fat content, blood pressure, and oxidative stress markers in metabolically stressed adults, without any change in caloric intake or dietary composition. The food was identical, the timing changed, and the biological difference across all 3 organs was measurable and clinically meaningful. Continuous eating removes the metabolic breathing room that your liver, kidneys, and pancreas were designed to operate within. Restoring it is one of the highest leverage changes available to you. The second habit is one that carries perhaps the most misleading health narrative of any behavior on this list, and that is the daily consumption of over-the-counter pain medications, specifically non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs or NSAIDs, taken regularly for headaches, joint discomfort, back pain, or general pain management. Ibuprofen, naproxen, aspirin, and their equivalents are among the most widely used medications in the world. They are available without prescription, they are effective for their intended purpose, and they are culturally positioned as entirely routine, the pharmaceutical equivalent of a glass of water when something hurts. What they are not is benign to your kidneys and your liver when used habitually, and the research on this is considerably clearer and more alarming than the packaging suggests. The kidneys are the organ most acutely vulnerable to regular NSAID use. NSAIDs work by inhibiting prostaglandin synthesis. The same prostaglandins that create pain and inflammation also play an essential role in maintaining adequate blood flow to the kidneys by dilating the renal arterioles that supply them. When prostaglandin production is suppressed by regular NSAID use, renal blood flow is reduced. The kidneys compensate initially, but under conditions of sustained NSAID exposure, particularly in individuals who are even mildly dehydrated, as most adults chronically are, that compensation fails. A 2017 study in the American Journal of Kidney Diseases found that regular NSAID use, defined as more than 10 days per month, was associated with a significant and dose-dependent increase in the risk of chronic kidney disease progression in adults without prior renal diagnosis. These were not people with existing kidney problems. They were people taking pain medication regularly, as millions do, without any awareness of the renal consequences accumulating beneath the surface. The liver carries its own burden from habitual NSAID use through a different mechanism. NSAIDs are metabolized hepatically, producing reactive metabolites that can trigger direct hepatocellular injury in susceptible individuals, a condition called NSAID-induced hepatotoxicity that ranges from mild transient enzyme elevation to, in rare cases, acute liver failure. More relevant to the majority of people is the compounding effect of regular NSAID use on a liver already under metabolic stress from diet and lifestyle, an organ whose detoxification capacity is already partially consumed by fructose processing, alcohol clearance, and environmental toxin burden, and that is being asked simultaneously to metabolize a daily pharmaceutical load. The liver manages until it does not quite manage as well as it once did. And the standard liver function panel remains normal throughout because the resilience of the organ absorbs the insult long before the measurement reflects it. If pain management is a daily necessity, that underlying pain source deserves investigation and targeted treatment, not indefinite pharmaceutical suppression that is silently costing your kidneys and liver a degree of functional capacity they will not easily recover. The third habit is the one that generates the most defensive responses when I raise it, because it is the one most deeply embedded in cultural ritual, social identity, and genuine pleasure. It is regular alcohol consumption, not in the sense of addiction or obvious excess, but in the sense of the 1 or 2 drinks most evenings that have become as automatic as dinner itself. The glass of wine with a meal, the beer at the end of a working day, the social drinks at the weekend, the amounts that stay within or near the official guidelines, that feel moderate, that carry the implicit cultural endorsement of being a normal part of adult life. The biology of what even moderate habitual alcohol does to the liver, the pancreas, and the kidneys is substantially more consequential than that cultural endorsement acknowledges. The liver bears the primary burden because alcohol, like fructose, is metabolized almost exclusively by the liver, through a pathway that generates a highly toxic intermediate metabolite called acetaldehyde before it is further broken down into acetate. Acetaldehyde is directly hepatotoxic. It damages hepatocyte DNA, triggers inflammatory signaling within liver tissue, and initiates the sequence of injury that, sustained over time, produces alcoholic fatty liver disease, hepatic fibrosis, and ultimately cirrhosis. A 2018 study in the British Medical Journal, analyzing data from nearly 600,000 adults across 19 countries, found no safe level of alcohol consumption for overall health, and found that hepatic risk began increasing at intakes well below the thresholds that most national guidelines define as moderate. More relevant to habitual daily drinkers is what the research shows about the cumulative effect of regular low to moderate alcohol on liver fat content. A 2021 study in hepatology found that habitual alcohol consumption of even 1 to 2 standard drinks daily was associated with measurably higher hepatic fat content compared to non-drinkers, independent of body weight, diet quality, and exercise habits. The pancreas is equally vulnerable through a different mechanism. Alcohol is one of the most potent known triggers of pancreatitis, acute inflammation of the pancreatic tissue that, in its severe form, is a medical emergency, and in its recurrent mild form, produces progressive fibrotic damage to pancreatic tissue that impairs both its exocrine function, the production of digestive enzymes, and its endocrine function, the production of insulin. A 2019 review in Gut found that alcohol consumption was the most common modifiable cause of both acute and chronic pancreatitis globally, and that the risk began increasing at intakes substantially below what most people would classify as heavy drinking. The pancreas does not signal early pancreatitis clearly. The mild recurrent episodes that accumulate into chronic damage often produce only vague upper abdominal discomfort that people attribute to indigestion and do not investigate further. Meanwhile, beta cell mass is quietly declining, and insulin secretory capacity is being progressively compromised in ways that will only become apparent years later when glucose regulation begins to visibly deteriorate. The fourth habit is the one that of all 5, most people are genuinely surprised to encounter on this list, because it is a habit that is not only culturally normalized, but actively celebrated as responsible adult behavior. It is chronic sleep restriction, the routine prioritization of productivity, social engagement, or screen time over sufficient, consistent, high-quality sleep. The adult who sleeps 6 hours because there is too much to do, who wakes at 5 for early commitments and stays up past midnight for personal time, who tells themselves they function well on less sleep and means it sincerely because the body's adaptation to insufficient sleep includes a suppression of the subjective experience of sleepiness that masks the actual degree of biological impairment occurring beneath the surface. What chronic sleep restriction does to these 3 organs specifically is documented with a clarity and consistency in the research that I find remarkable, given how little it is discussed in mainstream health conversations. For the pancreas, the impact is direct and rapid. A 2010 study in the Annals of Internal Medicine found that restricting healthy adults to 5.5 hours of sleep per night for just 2 weeks reduced insulin sensitivity by 20% and reduced the acute insulin response to glucose by 30%, meaning the pancreas was both less effective at producing insulin and the insulin it produced was less effective at its target tissues. 2 weeks of modest sleep restriction produced a metabolic profile comparable to early prediabetes in previously healthy adults. The pancreas was compensating by the end of the study period. The fasting glucose still looked normal. The damage was already real. For the kidneys, chronic sleep restriction disrupts the circadian regulation of renal function that is essential for normal filtration, fluid balance, and blood pressure regulation. The kidneys follow a strict daily rhythm, altering their filtration rate, sodium handling, and hormonal output across the 24-hour cycle in ways that depend on the circadian signals generated during sleep. When sleep is consistently insufficient or mistimed, that rhythm is disrupted, blood pressure regulation becomes less precise, and the mechanical stress on the renal microvasculature increases. A 2016 study in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology found that short sleep duration was independently associated with accelerated kidney function decline over a 10-year follow-up period in adults with no prior renal diagnosis. The kidneys were aging faster in the people sleeping less, not dramatically faster, but measurably, consistently, and cumulatively faster in ways that compound over decades of adult life. For the liver, sleep is the primary window for hepatic repair, glycogen regulation, and the clearance of the inflammatory byproducts that accumulate during metabolic activity throughout the day. A 2019 study in the Journal of Hepatology found that short sleep duration was significantly associated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease prevalence and severity, independently of diet, physical activity, body weight, and alcohol use. The liver was accumulating more fat in people sleeping less through the combined effects of elevated cortisol, disrupted insulin signaling, and the loss of the hepatic repair window that adequate sleep provides. The fifth habit is perhaps the hardest to address because it is not a single behavior but a pervasive feature of the modern food environment that has become the default rather than the exception. It is the daily consumption of ultra-processed food, not as an occasional indulgence but as the structural foundation of daily eating. Ready meals, packaged snacks, breakfast cereals, flavored yogurts, processed meats, fast food, and the hundreds of other products that are manufactured from refined ingredients, industrial seed oils, added sugars, artificial emulsifiers, flavor enhancers, and preservatives. These are not simply foods that are nutritionally poor in the conventional sense of being low in vitamins or high in calories. They are foods that contain specific compounds, emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, refined fructose, and industrial additives that directly disrupt the biological function of all three organs we are discussing through well-characterized mechanistic pathways. For the liver, the relevant mechanism is the fructose and refined carbohydrate load that ultra-processed food delivers, concentrated, rapidly absorbed, and stripped of the fiber that would moderate its hepatic impact. The liver processes this load through de novo lipogenesis, accumulating fat in its own tissue and releasing triglycerides into circulation that elevate cardiovascular risk and impair insulin signaling throughout the body. For the pancreas, the mechanism is the repeated high-amplitude glucose and insulin spikes that ultra-processed food produces, demanding supraphysiological insulin output from beta cells that are simultaneously being damaged by the oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling that the food's additives generate in gut tissue. For the kidneys, the relevant mechanism is the sodium load. Ultra-processed food accounts for approximately 70% of dietary sodium intake in populations where it is consumed regularly, which elevates blood pressure, increases renal filtration pressure, and accelerates the glomerular damage that is the primary pathway of chronic kidney disease progression. A 2019 study published in the British Medical Journal, following more than 100,000 adults over 5 years, found that a 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a significant increase in overall mortality, cardiovascular events, and metabolic disease incidence, independent of caloric intake, nutrient composition, and physical activity. The harm was not explained by calories or macronutrients alone. It was explained by the specific biological effects of industrial food additives and processing techniques on the gut, the liver, the pancreas, and the vascular system simultaneously. So what do you actually do with this? Because understanding 5 destructive habits is only valuable if it translates into action that is specific, prioritized, and genuinely achievable. The most immediately impactful change is to establish a consistent eating window of 8 to 10 hours and protect a genuine overnight fast of at least 12 to 14 hours. This does not require caloric restriction or any particular dietary philosophy. It simply requires consolidating your eating into a defined daily period and allowing the metabolic breathing room that your liver, pancreas, and kidneys were designed to operate within. Begin with the simplest version, stop eating after dinner, and do not eat again until genuine hunger arrives the following morning. That single structural change begins to restore the hormonal cycling that continuous eating has been suppressing. The second change is to conduct an honest audit of your regular NSAID use. If you are taking pain medication more than a few times per month, that pattern deserves medical attention, not because the medication is categorically harmful in acute use, but because habitual use is accumulating renal and hepatic costs that the standard screening will not detect until they are significant. Address the underlying pain source, explore alternative pain management strategies. Discuss the pattern with your doctor explicitly, including its impact on kidney and liver function over time. The third change is to introduce 2 consecutive alcohol-free days per week as a structural minimum, not as a moral position, but as a biological necessity for hepatic and pancreatic recovery. The liver requires a genuine period of low alcohol exposure to reduce acetaldehyde burden, restore glutathione levels, and allow hepatic cellular repair to proceed. 2 consecutive days matters more than 2 non-consecutive days because the repair process requires a sustained window, not an interrupted one. If 2 days feels difficult to implement, that response itself is biologically informative and worth paying attention to. The fourth change is to treat your sleep timing with the same structural seriousness that you treat your most important daily commitments. Establish a consistent sleep and wake time across all 7 days of the week. The circadian regularization this produces is, mechanistically, as important for organ function as the total hours of sleep obtained. A cool sleep environment, the elimination of bright screen exposure in the final hour before bed, and the removal of alcohol from the evening, which fragments sleep architecture and suppresses the deep sleep stages most associated with metabolic restoration, are the three most evidence-supported behavioral changes for sleep quality, and together they address the fourth habit's organ consequences directly. The fifth change is to make whole, minimally processed food the default architecture of your diet, rather than the occasional exception. This does not require elaborate meal preparation or the elimination of every processed food. It requires that the majority of what you eat most days is recognizable as real food: vegetables, legumes, meat, fish, eggs, nuts, seeds, whole intact grains, and fruit, rather than manufactured from industrial ingredients. That shift, sustained consistently, removes the primary dietary drivers of hepatic fat accumulation, pancreatic beta cell stress, and renal sodium overload simultaneously. Here is what I want you to understand above everything else today. The 5 habits we have discussed are not extraordinary. They are not the habits of people who are indifferent to their health. They are the habits of the majority of adults living ordinary modern lives, eating throughout the day because that is what the food environment encourages, taking pain medication because it works and because it is available, drinking moderately because everyone around them does, sleeping less than they need because there is always more to do, and eating processed food because it is convenient and ubiquitous. The problem is not intention. The problem is that these habits are operating on a biological system that was not designed for the specific stresses of the modern environment, and that the liver, the kidneys, and the pancreas are absorbing those stresses silently, resiliently, and progressively until the resilience gives way. The reversal is available to the same degree that the damage is. These organs are biologically responsive. The liver reduces its fat content within weeks of removing its primary stressors. Insulin sensitivity recovers measurably within 4 to 8 weeks of reducing pancreatic overload. Renal filtration function stabilizes when the mechanical and toxic burden on it is reduced. The biology moves in the direction of the inputs it receives. Give it different inputs and it will produce a different outcome. That is not optimism. That is the consistent finding of the intervention research across all 3 organ systems. If today gave you the specific understanding needed to begin making those changes, please like this video and subscribe. There is considerably more coming that I believe will matter to you just as much. I will see you in the next one.